The Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Local Transportation will come to order. And will the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Steele.
Here.
Representative Slaw. Representative DeCina. Representative Robinson.
Present.
Representative Morgan. Representative Edwards. Madam Chair, you have 3 of 7 members who do not have a quorum.
Did you say Borton? I didn't hear you or respond.
You know, I'm sorry. I was reading. Yes, Representative Borton, are you here?
I wondered if I missed it.
No, I have limited responsibilities here, but I didn't fulfill them. I apologize.
Sorry.
So being that we do not have a quorum, we are still going to have our committee meeting and have testifying. We just are not able at this point to approve the minutes, and I think that will be okay. And we still want to be able to call the Port of Detroit forward, and with us today is Mark Schrupp. He's the Executive Director of the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority, and I really appreciate you coming in today, and I know it's a drive. It will be televised, so people that are not here can watch it from their home or watch it later, but you were so gracious to give us a wonderful tour of the Port Authority and all the knowledge in which you had to share while we were there during that tour. I wanted to make sure that the committee and the state of Michigan could also hear what you had to share about the port. And being on this subcommittee of transportation, I didn't realize that the Detroit Port Authority is part of our budget and that we fund it to a certain level within our budget. And I just wanted the committee and the state to see what we do support and fund as part of our budget process. So with that, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Steele and members of the committee. It's my honor to be here to provide some information about the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority, but also largely the maritime priorities here in the state and the importance of maritime activity to our region and our people. I've got a little presentation. I'll try to keep it lively. It covers a lot, so let me know if it's dragging. So, just topics I'll cover, just an introduction to who the Port Authority is, as well as what the Port of Detroit is, some of the initiatives that the Port Authority has undertaken, some of our accomplishments, give you an idea of what your annual appropriation is getting for our residents, some other strategic advantages of maritime in the Port of Detroit, and then the overall impact of maritime for our Midwest economy. We want to look at what other states in the Midwest are doing to support maritime here in the Great Lakes, and then open up for questions. So, by way of background, the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority is relatively young compared to a lot of port authorities around the world. We were founded in 1978 pursuant to a new law that was created that year. Henry Ford II, chairman of Ford, and the Mayor Coleman Young decided that we needed an actual port authority in Detroit. The port existed, but there wasn't really a governmental entity that would kind of lead the region. So the statute was created, and then under that statute, the city of Detroit and Wayne County formed an agreement to create the Detroit-Wayne County Port Authority. We're a municipal entity, but we're not a department of either of those entities. Our board of directors is appointed by the city, the county, and the governor, and our funding is also provided 50% by the state, 25% by each of the counties. The total amount of that funding varies depending on priorities. But our mission is to advance maritime trade and related industries, initiate port and transit infrastructure projects, and support economic development and international trade. We work with Customs and Border Protection officials to make sure that inspections are efficient and fair. And then we also have staff, and we do lots of grant writing and looking for funding for the maritime industry. We are also an economic development agency, so we have typical tools like low-interest bond funding for capital projects. Mostly these are pass-through financings. We also, just by way of reference, we do have a bill to tweak our statute to give us a little more flexibility. It's passed the Senate, and it's in the House right now. We've received pretty much overwhelming bipartisan support of that because it's really just allowing businesses in the port region to access lower interest financing. And so that's our mission, to make those projects move forward and create jobs. We've applied successfully for other grants, EPA grants for new equipment, as well as for cleaning up brownfield sites. Our focus is really about public-private partnerships, not creating a big governmental entity. We've got 7 employees now with some of the grant funding, but we stay relatively lean. Here's a map showing, or aerial view of the actual port of Detroit, which is really a geographic designation for maritime terminals that receive cargo goods. The Port of Detroit probably existed before the city was created because it was a place where goods were moved in and out of the water, but the modern Port of Detroit was essentially created when Henry Ford decided that automobiles would be produced here in mass quantities and expanded the amount of cargo raw materials coming in. You can see the Detroit River along the right there, with Windsor to the south and Wayne County to the left there. There's a little stream going that feeds into the Detroit River. That's the Rouge River, and that is navigable by ocean-going ships. And so all the way at the end of that is the old Ford Rouge plant, which is where Henry Ford built a vertically integrated plant to make everything that was required for a car. Our jurisdiction as a port authority extends the length of the Detroit River and up the Rouge River as long as it's navigable. So it's about 32 miles. Presently, about 8 to 10 million tons of cargo are handled through the Port of Detroit at all of the private terminals. The Port Authority doesn't directly manage any of those, but they're privately operated. That figure is down significantly from the heyday of the 50s and 60s, when more manufacturing was handled here in Metro Detroit. As that manufacturing has been dispersed to other parts of the country, our tonnages have declined, but it's still very significant. It's responsible for about 6,000 jobs here in Michigan, or in the port region. Of almost $1 billion of economic activity is directly tied to the movement of goods. Virtually all of the cargo is imports, and most of that is domestic. Raw materials, we have 5 cement plants, liquid petroleum. We do receive some steel products from Europe. Kinds of steel that aren't made in the U.S. Are brought in for local manufacturing. But the tonnages have been declining. DTE Energy closed a coal-fired power plant, which they've been doing around the state. That reduced tonnage, but we're rapidly looking at ways to repurpose a lot of this land for other uses. 3 years ago, the state awarded the Port Authority with funding to look at ways to improve air quality and reduce carbon emissions in southeast Michigan in the port region. As you can see, this is sort of an EPA air quality map. Our port is right in the middle of all that red, which is a measurement of air quality. Most of that is from industrial processes, but a lot of it comes from port activity. And we found a need to improve air quality for our community and the region. So with this funding, we conducted a baseline assessment of all port activity, determined the sources, and developed a plan to transition out of the dirtier fuels to greener fuels, and eventually to reach net zero by 2040 to improve air quality and reduce those harmful emissions. We engaged with the private terminals which, and it was a voluntary engagement. We don't have authority, but we were able to engage with the private terminals, obtain data and their cooperation with some of our initiatives. We engaged with our neighbors in the residents who live in the area and worked on ideas that they brought forward. We brought in experts who helped us with our calculations and recommendations for improvement. Out of that planning process, we've developed some strategies to reduce emissions, improve air quality moving forward. The number one and most immediate of those strategies is to transition from diesel to biodiesel, which if you look at it, biodiesel is simply bringing oil from organic materials, mainly soybean, and adding that to diesel in larger quantities. B20 is a 20% biodiesel, and it reduces particulate matter, improves air quality. Our goal is to increase that. What's good about the biodiesel, it's a drop-in fuel. No engine replacements are required. It's a lower cost upfront for ship owners, for truck drivers and others. Changing filters is important, but it's a good way to reduce emissions without expending huge dollars on capital investment. In the long run, we're seeing electrification and other kinds of fuels coming into the maritime sector, and we're working to help find funding to make sure that's possible. As a result of our planning process, we were actually in a good position to receive an EPA ports grant, which we're implementing right now, and that will allow us to purchase electric equipment in the ports, to a few boats for the harbor master, and other things that will reduce the reliance on diesel fuel and introduce zero tailpipe emission equipment. We also have a planning grant which will help us study the transition to other fuels like hydrogen. And we're also looking at a fuel barge concept that will allow those tankers that are unloading their iron ore and other things at our docks to turn off their generators and plug into clean electricity that's generated by this power barge. So our planning grant will put us in a position to reduce those emissions while ships are at the dock, as well as our cruise ships while they're at the dock. Just want to talk a little bit about what the Port Authority does beyond working with the cargo terminals. We are the host for, we promote work, careers in the maritime trades. A lot of people don't really know much about it, but there are really good paying jobs as ship captains, ship engineers, working in various trades on the ships. There's a shortage of workers, and so we're trying to expose young people to these careers. Great Lakes Maritime Academy in Traverse City is an excellent school that produces ship captains who are qualified to work in the Great Lakes or around the world. So we're trying to get more young people interested in that with an annual career fair. We host cruise ships. Some of you may have seen more and more of these luxury or different levels of luxury. Viking has 2 cruise ships that come into the Great Lakes. They spend the whole summer doing voyages from Toronto to Milwaukee and Chicago. Well, they don't hit Chicago, but they go to Milwaukee and back. They go up into the Lake Superior, lots of different voyages. They're beautiful, they're big, they're expensive. I could never afford to go on one, but it's bringing a lot of tourists to our region, and they're spending a day in Metro Detroit visiting all the museums and really seeing things that they never could have imagined. So we are hosting 70 visits this summer, about 15,000 passengers crossing our dock and spending a day in the city. We're also hosting a Tall Ships Festival. A little shameless plug here. We're selling tickets for our August 8th through 10th event. Come down to the Detroit River and see these majestic ships that kind of mimic the sailing ships of the 1800s and learn about maritime history here in the Great Lakes and have a good time. It's a family-friendly event, but the last time we hosted Tall Ships was in 2001, so it'll be great to have them back. One other thing that we do, and it's one of the grant writing things we've done is to apply for and receive EPA cleanup funds that through a revolving loan fund program. So we receive the grant, and then we administer that fund for projects. If a developer is trying to build in an area where there's contamination, we can provide lower interest funding for cleanup costs. So it helps make some of those brownfield sites more feasible with that funding. And so we've been doing that for about 10 years. So that's sort of an overview of some of the things. There's a lot more, but I wanted to give you an overview of what the Port Authority is doing with the annual appropriation that we receive from the state. Just want to talk a little bit about the Port of Detroit and how we market it to potential investors in the region or manufacturers who want to locate here. We are still the #1 hub for automotive production. We are the #4 city in the country for logistics and distribution. We reach 47 million people in the U.S. and Canada within 5 hours drive. So we are strategically located here in the center of the Great Lakes. We are also a #9 exporter of agricultural products, and we've been doing a lot of research to develop an agricultural export terminal. It's a shame that our ag producers have to go down to Toledo and export out of Ohio, so I want to try to change that. So we're working to find a partner who can set up shop in the Port of Detroit so our farmers can reach international markets. We have lots of deep water port terminals, and a lot of those are former industrial sites that have now aren't doing what they used to do, so there's a lot of land available. We're very close to highways, Class 1 rails, and we have a foreign trade zone. So there's a lot of reasons why manufacturers and other entities should want to locate here in Michigan and specifically along the Detroit River. We've been engaging with different entities. I mentioned the agriculture. We're looking at short sea movement of goods. Done a lot of study around moving finished vehicles on the water. In the early days before the interstate, that's how Henry Ford moved his cars around. After interstates and expansion of roads and rail, that moved to the roads. But we think we could reduce some of the traffic on the roads with that ship that's about at the top there can hold 240 F-150s and replace 30 trucks on the road. We're working to try to make that financially feasible. Overall, the Great Lakes is important for Michigan and all of the states that touch it. An economic development study done in 2023 talked about the Great Lakes Seaway System. On the map, you can see how ships can reach our region from the Atlantic Ocean through a series of locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway System, traveling through Canada, through Lake Ontario, into Lake Erie, and eventually reach us. But that whole region, the maritime system, is responsible for 135 million metric tons of cargo moved, $36 billion of economic activity, almost 250,000 jobs, and $17 billion in wages paid. It's a vital manufacturing supply chain, but it's important to maintain the system. There's some studies done around the Soo locks that if they were to close, the economic impact negatively would be enormous. So that's why we're happy that there's funding to improve the lock system from the Lake Superior down to the lower Great Lakes. This is something I shared with Representative Steele when she came to Detroit, just some comparison between Michigan and some other states that invest in their own maritime activity. Indiana recently put $50 million in infrastructure at Burns Harbor, which is right at the south end of Lake Michigan. Illinois has committed since 2019, $150 million for their harbor and river systems. Ohio has a regular maritime assistance program that's funded at $10 million, and Wisconsin does quite a bit for their ports. Now in Michigan, we do a lot for a lot of industries. I know that the current there's a current effort to really increase the support for maritime, and the Port Authority is very grateful for the annual commitment of $600,000 for our general fund. In 2024, there was a $5 million funded into the Michigan Maritime Facility Assistance Program, which is a new program created in '23. We were a beneficiary of that, but in '25, there was no funding for it. We hope that that can be refunded, and that's a program that not just port authorities, but any terminal, private or public. So private terminals can apply directly into that fund and receive money to invest in capital improvements. So we think it's important to upgrade our capital investment in ports. The direct support that we received is our $600,000 annually from the state, and we got $300,000 each from the city and the county for our $1.2 million general fund. We do want to acknowledge the state support for our EPA grant. They contributed $1.25 million for local match on a federal grant that paid 90% of the cost of the improvement, so we're very grateful for that. Sorry for running through a whole lot of stuff, but there's a lot to cover, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And we hosted several folks in June for a boat tour. I'm happy to do that any day if you're interested in coming down and seeing the port from the water side.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I think it was like almost a day's worth of information when I went to the actual tour, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. But I do have a question about, I was fortunate enough to go to ALEC conference. It's an exchange council for legislators, and one of the favorite classes that I went to was how the Chinese are eating our lunch. That's how it was named in our maritime industry. And it really brought my attention to how we need to focus a lot on what we have to offer in our maritime opportunities in the state of Michigan. So that's my lead-in. They did discuss the Jones Act. And the Jones Act is roughly, if I just, in a quick overview, that all of the ships that are traveling through the United States have to be built in the United States for safety. That's just kind of my overview. But my question ends up being, is if you could elaborate on that, sure. Is when Canada is right across the river, how do they comply with that if they do? And then I'm just going to tag it into my other Canada question about all your admissions and how thoughtful that we have been on making sure that our port is clean and it's been cleaned up. What do they do to help enhance the cleanup of emissions and the waterways? So it's two questions, the Jones and the cleaning of making sure that their EPA is following the same guidelines we are.
Sure. Just one clarification on the Jones Act. It's about 100 years old, and the intent was to make sure that there was a continuing shipbuilding industry in the U.S. so that we wouldn't be dependent on foreign-built ships. But the requirement is that for any ship that is moving from one U.S. terminal to another U.S. terminal, that the ship be built, owned, and staffed with U.S. So a Canadian ship bringing cargo from Canada to the U.S. is not required to comply with the Jones Act. And so consequently, well, Canada has used to do a lot more shipbuilding, and to reduce costs, they have modified their laws, and they now bring in ships built in other countries. I think some Chinese ships are being some Chinese ship. It's a Canadian flag and owned and staffed ship, but the construction was in Canada. So for example, if we were to move cargo I guess you could have some U.S. companies that exclusively brought international cargo in, and they wouldn't be required to comply with the Jones Act. Some people have criticized it because over the years, because of lower costs of production or maybe even state subsidy of certain industries, maybe in China, the cost, China's able to produce ships at a much lower cost than here in the U.S., and a lot of the international carriers that bring cargo, mostly to the coast, not necessarily within the Great Lakes, are purchasing ships. Japan and Taiwan and other countries have been big producers of those international ships. Most of those big cargo ships that have containers never get into the Great Lakes. They're too big. The seaway system that was created in the mid-50s has a limit to the size of the ship that can go through those locks. There's about 18 locks that ships have to go to get from the Atlantic Ocean up to the level of the Great Lakes, and it's just under 800 feet long and under 90 feet wide. And those big cargo ships that bring the containers in are far too big for that. A Great Lakes, a Seaway compliant ship could probably only hold about 4,000 of those containers. The big ships that go from China to LA are almost 20,000 containers. They're just way too big to get in. Within the Great Lakes, we do get some international ships that fit within the Great Lakes, but some are made in China. We get international shipments of steel, and then some of the exporting states like Duluth and Toledo with agricultural exports. So the ships bring in those steel products, and then they leave with agriculture. FedNav is a company that gets ships not from China but from some other countries, but they don't have to comply with the Jones Act. It's been around a while. It's allowed some of our shipbuilders to stay in business, but they don't sell ships for international cargo movement. We make ships that move product from U.S. to Puerto Rico, or from Seattle up to Alaska. A lot of the ferries that go around have to comply with the Jones Act, and some of the barges that move cargo within the Great Lakes also. The ships that move cargo within the Great Lakes, some of those are too big. They don't leave. So when we bring iron ore on 1,000-footers up from Duluth, those are U.S.-made ships, and they never leave the Great Lakes. They also last a long time. I mean, a lot of these ocean-going ships, because of the salt water, they last 20, 40 years maybe. The Great Lakes ships, some of them are over 100 years old. The salt water isn't here. They're built stronger. They maybe get new engines over time, but they do last quite a while. Your second, did that help with the Jones Act?
And I just want to, the other part about the Jones Act is about the shipbuilding. And out of 1,000 ships that are built in the world, we build one. China builds 600, and South Korea builds 500. And I was really concerned about that. And that the other thing is, of all the international ports in the world, China has 150 countries that they have ports in. And they have them at every choke point, and here we are in a room with a bunch of legislators with all this information, and they were on their phones looking at Facebook and stuff and not listening to how important that this is for the United States. And so I was just like to bring that up
Sure.
right now, because that class was very interesting. And so that answers my question about the Jones Act, but the other, that was my scolding at the same time, but the other one was about the Chinese, not the Chinese, you see I've got Chinese on the brain. It was about the Canadian and following the, are there EPA requirements? I saw piles of stuff out there where we didn't have piles of stuff meaning like cement, coal. They were just sitting on the ground, and ours were under covers, and they were on cement ground, and it just seemed like we were being more what's the word, ecology conscious. So
Yeah.
I just want to hear your input on that.
There, in the Port of Detroit, you have 5 cement terminals. Not all of them use the enclosed silos and things like that. So even under our rules, you've got standards from Eagle and some local standards that govern particulate matter or how you handle piles. So on both sides, U.S. and Canada, you'll see large piles. They're required to spray them down to reduce the amount of dust blowing into the wind. So, I wouldn't say that the Port of Detroit is clean or green by any stretch. We initiated our planning 2 years ago to improve air quality because of the health outcomes of people who live nearby. It was important to address those concerns. And find ways for businesses to, utilize better practices that don't create negative health outcomes.
So Canada's doing okay too. Yeah.
I haven't studied their laws, but I know they have big piles just like we do, and but they're some of our terminals receive materials from Canada and vice versa. A lot of the companies that operate in the U.S. side also have terminals on the other side. So Holcomb, the company that we visited, was owned by Europe. Now they've spun off their whole North American operations, but they've got terminals in U.S., Canada. I'm not sure about Mexico, but it's a whole North American operation.
And which is good because I know that it's industry, so it's being as clean as you are, I think that you're moving in the right direction, but it's still, you're moving shipments of raw materials. And so it's a port, so we have to be conscious of that, what it's providing for us as an economic engine. So I'm behind all that. But the grant that you received from the EPA and that there was a match, has that been fully funded? Because I just was curious if there was any retraction with the new administration. I hope not, but...
No. Well, there's been some stops and starts. After January 20th, there was a freeze on the funds. The grant was announced in October. It was a 3-year grant cycle, so it was going to take 3 years to implement anyway. We started to draw down in January. There was a freeze, and then the freeze was lifted through a court injunction. Since then, we believe that the grant amount is secure, but we've got a lot of work to do in terms of, this is a grant to purchase equipment, and some of that equipment is 2-year lead cycle because it's new battery electric equipment that's used in the port. So it'll take a while to actually spend it down and do the charger installation. So it's important for that money to remain secure. We met with, we had a periodic meeting with our EPA project manager, and we're told that the money is secure. It was not part of a rescission package. It was removed where other funding under the IRA was removed. So we're hopeful and getting more confident that money will not be touched.
That's big, beautiful news to me. So thank you for that. And then my other question is, we had the privilege of going under the Gordie Howe Bridge, which literally one of the piers of the actual bridge, I think, sits in the port. It's right there. And to be underneath that, it's just incredible that that's in the state of Michigan. I was just so enthused about between that bridge and the port and the international waterways. I just think that it's such an underutilized transportation that we need to take a real strong look at. So while we were doing the tour, going under the bridge, we had a very lovely visual of Zug Island. And so you were very enthusiastic about the opportunity there, and I know this is not really in your presentation, but maybe touch on that a little bit, because I see that being an MEDC transformative opportunity.
Yeah, I don't know if it's MEDC or otherwise, but what we actually have a funding request for a sort of region-wide planning effort to take advantage of the transition from some of these older industrial sites into something new. Not exactly sure what those industries are. Perhaps it's manufacturing, reshoring, or other things. But since our boat tour, we received more information about the acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon, and what's included in that is an investment of $11 billion in U.S. steel production by the new company, U.S. Steel. And I've engaged with the downriver communities. They have a planning committee, and the city of River Rouge and Ecorse, where the U.S. Steel sites are. There's over 1,000 acres of U.S. Steel property on not just Zug Island, but 2 other sites on the river that have largely shut down over the last 20 years. There used to be 4 blast furnaces. Now they're still there, but they're not making steel. And so we don't want those sites to just sit there and rust. We want some action taken to clean up those sites, get them ready, get them shovel ready for new projects. No one's going to invest in those sites while they're sitting there rusting away. So we're pushing MEDC or others who have economic development as their main goal to help get those ready. Those sites are so strategically located, it's worth the investment. Engage with U.S. Steel to get those properties converted. But there was one thing on the announcement of the U.S. Steel purchase that made us think, well, maybe we can save some of that. They announced $11 billion investment. They identified $10 billion of actual projects. None are in Michigan, but there's $1 billion that's still left to be awarded. And so we're trying to get everyone together to make a pitch for that $1 billion. It's called a mini mill. It's making steel from recycled projects. And so we're in the midst of a lot of discussions with the local communities and at the governor's level and MEDC to put together a really solid package to keep U.S. Steel here.
And we were actually, after our meeting, we actually reached out to somebody that we knew from the Japan consulate to be able to plug in for Zug Island as well, too. So we actually are in your court, and if there's something that we can offer at the state level, please reach out to us, because I think that should be an economic engine that we should be looking out for. You mentioned earlier about the low interest rate to clean up brownfields. Would that apply to this as well, or is it only for the ports?
Well, we would need more money, and our fund is smaller, and we handle projects of less than $1 million. So it would qualify, but our fund is not large enough. I mean, Zug Island might even fall into a super fund category, and there may be federal funds that could be used to clean that up. The other thing is that cleanup and that contamination is U.S. Steel's responsibility as a responsible party owner of the property. So there's some funding that could come from that, and they've done that in other sites that have closed. And so there's a lot of sort of negotiating between U.S. Steel and the next owner and the EPA and Eagle to figure out what's the true cost of cleanup. And if we're planning on future industrial, it may not be as much. It needs to be done well and properly, but we just want it to happen sooner rather than later, because at the moment their taxable value has been really dropped. The cities of Ecorse and River Rouge have seen declining revenues, and all they have is a lot of really good land that is doing nothing.
Like a data center or a battery plant type of a facility?
Perhaps light manufacturing is one of the new topics. That, there was a Cadillac plant that was converted to a Lear facility in Detroit recently. I think there's different pieces of manufacturing that could still be viable there. A data center doesn't produce a lot of jobs, so maybe not first thing, but maybe some other things that do produce more jobs.
Well, there is 395 acres there, so there's lots of room to do a lot of things. So I do have one last question, and then I'm just opening up to see, do you have, okay. My last question, then I'll pass it over to Rep. Borton, but can you give me an example of the $1 million project that you could fund with, not fund, but be able to be a pass-through for that area for a low-interest loan?
Sure, because that revolving fund has revolved. It's not just $1 million, it's prior amounts. So we funded expansions of hospital campuses. So if it's almost anything that is being built on a site that has contamination that can benefit from that low-interest loan. We've done affordable housing projects. The Piquette Square project. We also funded a co-op grocery store on the north end that was featuring urban farm produce in an area where there weren't any grocery stores. We're in discussions with some other larger developments that are in the works in Detroit. I can't talk right now about them, but a pretty significant arena type thing that might benefit from that. So we're prospecting to find good projects that can benefit from this and make the payments. So yeah, almost anything could.
So I was thinking that it had to be port related, but you just indicated that it's not by the projects that you described.
Correct. I mean, we would like to do more in the port, but we want to keep the money moving, and under the EPA rules, it can be anywhere in our jurisdiction, which is Wayne County. So
okay.
Yeah.
Rep. Borton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your presentation today. Very, very informative. I've got a question for you. It's a bit of a loaded question, but
Sure.
I'm going to run it by you anyways because you're doing such a great job answering them. You mentioned that different types of steel are imported from Europe. First of all, what types of steel are being imported from Europe, and why are we not making it here in the United States?
I know it's steel coils and things like that. I don't know exactly why they're not made here. We don't handle them. They're coming from Europe. I don't know if it's a lower cost or what. So I'm not positive why we're not making them here. Steel production has actually gone down quite a bit in the U.S., and even with tariffs, we haven't seen massive increases. We're nervous about Cleveland Cliffs. They've just announced recently reductions, cost-cutting maneuvers. So I don't know. We're energized by the Nippon, even though it's foreign-owned. The investment in new steel production is encouraging for local steel production. So
Okay.
maybe they'll put the Europeans out of business with the steel that they'll make. As a port authority, we're not trying to import everything from everywhere else. We're more of an economic development agency. We bring in what's needed that we don't have here. There's some aluminum that's made in other areas where the materials for making aluminum are more common. So those we get aluminum that's used in the F-150s that's brought in as well.
Okay, good answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you for your presentation, and I thank you for being here today. And I can't excuse absent members, so with no further business before this committee, I will announce it adjourned.